and the ledger 50,000 people watched in real time as Sarah Crane's face went white, her hand frozen halfway to her holster. The live stream counter climbed. Emily's voice, steady, relentless, narrated the financial codes with the precision of someone who'd memorized every damning entry. And somewhere in the background of that vault, bleeding and pinned between steel and frame, David was screaming. But that was the end. 13 hours earlier, Monday had begun like any other. The sub-basement archive of the Chicago Public Library existed in a state of permanent dusk. Fluorescent tubes hummed their monotonous song above filing cabinets that hadn't been touched in decades. Emily Turner descended the concrete stairs in latex gloves, her breath forming small clouds in the cold air. The building's bones groaned above her, the weight of millions of books pressing down through 7 stories of marble and steel. She had been assigned to the decommissioning project 3 weeks ago. Clear out the old records. Catalog what's worth saving. Shred the rest. Simple work. Mindless work. The kind that let her think about her weekend plans or whether she'd remembered to pay her electric bill. The filing cabinet was olive drab, industrial, the kind used by government agencies in the 1970s. Emily's gloved fingers gripped the edge of the topmost drawer and pulled. The metal groaned as it slid out to its full extension, the sound like something in pain. Empty. She frowned, pushing her tortoiseshell glasses up her nose. They slipped back down immediately. She reached to the back of the drawer, her palm pressing against the rear metal panel. It gave way with a soft click, barely audible, the kind of sound you might miss if you weren't paying attention. She tilted her head, her brown hair falling over her shoulder. A shadow behind the panel, a space where there shouldn't be one. Emily's fingernails hooked into the gap between panel and frame. She pried. The metal bent slightly, then folded back like a loose tooth. Behind it sat a thin, leather-bound volume, black, mottled with white mold. Thick gray dust, coating its spine like the accumulation of years, decades maybe. A wire bracket held it upright, as if someone had placed it there with the intention of keeping it hidden indefinitely, or at least until the world forgot its existence. She opened the ledger to the middle. The pages were filled with neat, cramped handwriting in black ink. Not typed, not printed. Handwritten by someone who'd taken the time to be precise, systematic. The columns were headed with designations that meant nothing to her at first glance. Code Alpha. Allocation, Ward 14. Numbers with 6 zeros trailed after every entry. Numbers that seemed to correspond to dollar amounts. Large dollar amounts, institutional dollar amounts. Emily snapped the book shut. The basement seemed to contract around her. She looked over her shoulder at the darkened archive entrance, the path she'd come down. The silhouette of the library's gargoyles visible through the high, narrow windows seemed to watch her, seemed to know. She slipped the ledger under her cardigan, the leather cold against her ribs. The fabric rustled as she moved. The sound seemed impossibly loud in the dead air of the sub-basement. The main reading room occupied the upper floors, where afternoon light streamed through tall windows and the smell of books and old paper hung like a pleasant fog. Emily walked quickly down the aisle between tall oak bookshelves, her footsteps deliberate. She needed to leave. She needed to go home and open that ledger under better light and figure out what she'd actually found. A man in a tan raincoat stepped out from behind a corner. He blocked her path. His eyes were hidden under a brimmed hat. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then his hand reached for her bag. Emily swung her heavy leather tote with everything she had. The impact caught him in the side of the head with a satisfying thwack. His hat flew off, spinning through the air, and crashed into a bookshelf. 3 books tumbled down, hitting the carpet with muffled thuds. He growled and shoved her backward. Her spine struck the edge of a metal cart laden with returns. The cart rolled away, wheels squeaking as it crashed into another shelf. He lunged. His hands found her throat, fingers digging into her skin. She kicked, her heel catching his shin. Pain flashed across his face. The shelves behind her seemed to tilt and spin. Emily grabbed a thick hardcover from the nearest shelf. The Wealth of Nations. She swung it like a club. The corner caught his ear. He stumbled back, releasing her. She ran. The staff elevator door was 50 feet down the corridor. Her feet flew across the carpet. She could hear him behind her, his breath ragged, his footsteps heavy. She slammed her palm onto the UP button. The doors crept open with their usual elderly groan. She threw herself inside. The man's hand shot through the gap. The metal doors snapped shut on his fingers. A scream, high-pitched, raw, echoed through the shaft as he jerked his hand back. The doors closed completely. The elevator lurched upward, and for the first time in what felt like hours, Emily breathed. The director's office was on the 4th floor, temporarily empty. The director was on sabbatical in Morocco, or so the rumor went. Emily leaned against the mahogany door, her chest heaving. She clicked the lock into place. The room was dark, lit only by the green glow of a desktop computer screen that had been left in sleep mode. She pulled the ledger from her sweater. Her hands were shaking. The leather felt different now, dangerous somehow, as if the binding had absorbed intent. She flipped to the final page, a list of 3 names. Under the heading, Executive Oversight, Dr. Marcus Thorne, Councilman Marcus Reed, Sarah Crane. Beside Reed's name was a red wax seal pressed into the page itself like evidence. Emily's finger traced the letters. Her colleague Sarah had mentioned that the councilman was introducing a new education reform bill. There was a newspaper on the desk. She reached for it. The headline dominated the front page. City Savior. Reed's education reform poised to transform schools. The numbers in the ledger, the 6 zeros, the allocations, the codes, education funds, laundered, run through the library's archival budget, coded as preservation expenses, database maintenance, digitization projects, moving through systems and accounts that no one outside the department would think to audit. Moving to accounts tied to Reed. A shadow crossed the frosted glass of the office door. Emily froze. She slid the ledger into a USPS flat-rate envelope sitting on the desk. Her tongue tasted like copper as she licked the seal, pressed it down. A thick cardboard rasp under her fingers. She scribbled her own home address on the envelope with a Sharpie, the markers squeaking against the cardboard like an animal in distress. She hid the envelope inside a stack of outgoing mail just as the door handle began to turn. Nothing. The handle stopped. Whoever had been outside moved on, their footsteps fading down the hallway. Emily waited until she could hear only the distant hum of the building systems. The clock on the wall read 5:45 p.m. The mail truck wasn't scheduled for pickup until 8:09 p.m. The underground parking garage beneath the library existed in a state of perpetual gloom, punctuated by fluorescent lights that flickered with the irregular heartbeat of failing ballasts. Emily's car was a 1989 Volvo 240, white with a rusted trim. Not fast, not inconspicuous. But it started when you turned the key. She was halfway to it when the headlights snapped on. A black SUV, heavy, expensive, the kind of vehicle used by security contractors and private military. The headlights blinded her, white and absolute. Tires screeched, the engine roared, burnt rubber filled the air. Emily dove between 2 parked cars. The SUV slammed into a concrete pillar inches from her, metal crumpling with a sound like thunder. Glass shattered. The shards fell like diamonds, catching the light, surrounding her in fractured reflection. A man stepped out of the smoking vehicle. Tactical vest. Professional. He held a taser in one hand, a commercial-grade tool, not a toy. He fired. The probes trailed copper wires through the air like angry insects. They hissed as they cut through empty space, missing her shoulder by inches. Emily's hand closed on the handle of a fire extinguisher mounted on the nearest pillar. She pulled the pin, the metal ring clattered as it fell, and sprayed. The white chemical powder erupted like a weapon. It filled the garage. It filled the world. For a moment, there was only white. Only the hiss of pressurized gas, only the wet cough of a man breathing in compounds his lungs had no defense against. Emily didn't wait to see him fall. She sprinted toward her car. The Volvo's door opened with a familiar creak. She slammed it into reverse. The engine, defying all probability, caught immediately. She floored the accelerator. The tires smoked. The car fishtailed, the rear end swinging out in a controlled skid. The asphalt seemed to reach up to meet her. She corrected, aiming for the exit ramp. Behind her, the garage echoed with the sound of coughing, of footsteps, of voices shouting into radios. The ramp led up. She drove. Emily's apartment occupied the third floor of a building that had seen better decades. The kitchen was small. The walls bore the faded watermarks of old damage. But the internet was functional, and that's what mattered now. She sat at her kitchen table with her laptop and her phone, the white USB cable connecting them in what she hoped was a secure transfer protocol. Rain lashed against the windows. Thunder rolled through the night sky. She'd left wet footprints across her hardwood floor, tracking in the storm. She clicked, Upload to Cloud. The progress bar appeared. 40%, 50%, 60%. Then it turned red. Access denied. Account suspended. Her folders began to disappear from the screen, one by one, like lights going out. Gone. 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 Emily grabbed her phone. The screen flickered. A new message appeared from an unknown number. The text was simple, professional, terrifying. We have the envelope. Bring the original to the vault by midnight. She looked around her apartment. The emergency flashlight that had hung on the wall above the kitchen sink. Gone. The lock on her front door bore fresh scratches around the keyhole, the marks of tools, of forced entry. They'd already been inside. The mail truck hadn't left the library yet. The pickup was scheduled for 8 p.m. It was now 7:30 p.m. Emily grabbed her keys. The metal jingled violently as she moved. She didn't stop to lock the door behind her. The library's loading dock faced the street where the USPS bins sat in the rain. Emily skidded her car to a halt on the wet asphalt. The world seemed to have narrowed down to this single moment, this single spot of concrete and steel. A man in a balaclava stood at the bin. His gloved hand was reaching inside, his fingers brushing through the stack of envelopes. Emily tackled him from behind. They crashed into the metal bin together. It tipped. Thousands of letters spilled out onto the wet concrete like a waterfall of paper. The noise was tremendous. The metallic boom of the bin striking the ground, the sound of thousands of pages hitting wet asphalt. A flood of envelopes in white and manila. Letters that someone had taken time to seal, to address, to entrust to the postal service. The man's boot caught her in the chest. Her head snapped back. Her spine struck the brick wall of the loading dock, and for a moment the world dissolved into pain and stars. He scrambled through the wet letters, his gloved hands tossing them aside, looking for the ledger, looking for her envelope. She saw it, the flat rate envelope with her own address written in her own hand, caught under his palm. Emily lunged. She grabbed the other end. They played a desperate tug-of-war over the cardboard. Her fingers were slipping. His grip was stronger. Then she drove her knee up with everything she had. The man's scream cut through the rain. The envelope ripped. For a moment, they both held pieces of it. Then Emily yanked what remained free, still containing the ledger, still intact, and sprinted toward the library's side entrance. Behind her, she could hear the sirens. The black and white squad car was pulling up to the loading dock. But the faces visible through the windshield weren't helpful. They were cold. They were professional. They weren't there to help. They were there to retrieve what she'd found. The rare books vault was a circle of steel and paranoia, a climate-controlled coffin designed to protect the library's most valuable acquisitions. Emily entered through the circular door, her heart still pounding from the sprint through the corridors. Behind her, the library was in chaos. Alarms had been triggered. Security was mobilizing. But the vault was still locked to her credentials. She set the ledger on the central glass display table and waited. For how long, she wasn't sure. Minutes, hours, the pressure-sealed air made her ears pop. The temperature was constant at 68 degrees Fahrenheit, the humidity precisely controlled. In here, nothing decayed. In here, nothing changed. The circular door swung shut with a hydraulic hiss. The locking bolts rotated. Clack, clack, clack. The sound of finality. The sound of imprisonment. Outside the small reinforced window, her colleague David stood. His face was composed. Professional. His eyes looked at her the way you might look at something that needed to be removed. Emily banged on the glass. No sound. The glass was too thick. The seal was perfect. David raised a remote control and clicked a button. Above her, the halon gas vents began to hiss. The thermostat display on the wall, always showing the optimal temperature for preservation, began to plummet. 40 degrees, 30 degrees, 20 degrees, and still falling. Emily wrapped her arms around herself. Her fingers were already turning blue at the tips. Her breath became visible in thick clouds that hung in the increasingly frigid air. The display case began to frost over. The floor tiles became slick with a thin coating of ice. She looked at the ledger. It sat on the glass table, perfectly preserved, perfectly useless. In a vault, locked, with her, and the temperature still falling. In the corner of the vault, she noticed it. An old archival laptop, still wired to the library's internal network. A legacy system left behind during a renovation. Emily crawled toward it, her movements slow and sluggish from the cold. The frost on the tiles cut against her skin. She could barely feel it anymore. The vault door opened at 11:30 p.m. David stood in the entrance, wearing a heavy winter parka. In his right hand, he held a silenced pistol. He stepped over Emily's limp form on the floor without hesitation, as if she were already dead. As if this was a formality, Emily's eyes snapped open. She swung the lead-filled beanbag, one of the weight anchors used to keep rare manuscripts from blowing off tables, into David's ankle. The bone cracked. The sound was unmistakable. David screamed, a high-pitched wail of pure pain, and the pistol skittered across the ice-slicked floor. They crashed together, his hands closed around her throat. She reached back, her fingers closing on a sharp fountain pen from the display table. The pen was a museum piece, worth thousands. She drove it into the fleshy part of his thigh without hesitation. Black ink mixed with red blood. David punched her. Her head bounced off the glass pedestal. She saw stars, literal stars, floating in her vision. But her hands were still moving. They had their own momentum now. Survival had become automatic. She grabbed the heavy steel door lever and yanked it with the last of her strength. The internal mechanism caught David's arm, pinning it between the door and the frame. The vault was designed to be secure. It was designed to protect things. It was very good at what it did. David's scream reached a frequency that seemed to bend the air itself. Emily held the lever. She didn't let go. David's breathing came in wheezing gasps. His arm was pinned. His ankle was broken. The pain was absolute. And yet, when Emily leaned down and asked him, "Who else?" he laughed. Blood bubbled between his teeth. "Look at the metadata," he said, his voice wet and thick. "Who authorized your login this morning? Who gave you the cabinet key?" Emily turned to the archival laptop. Her hands were shaking as she scrolled through the system logs. Name after name of people she worked with. People she trusted. People who'd been given her access codes, her clearances. And at the top, the master administrator account, S. Crane. Sarah Crane, her mentor, the woman who'd hired her 7 years ago. The woman who'd shown her how the library's archival systems worked. The woman who'd given her the key to the sub-basement. The vault's external intercom crackled. Static. Then a voice. Calm. Maternal. Almost kind. "Emily, dear, just leave the book and I'll open the door. Don't make this a tragedy." Emily looked at the laptop. The live stream icon stared back at her. A webcam icon. Connected to the library's official social media account, meant for the reading night event that had been canceled due to weather. A live stream that should have been dormant. A live stream that was ready to activate. Her finger hovered over the start button. She pressed it. Emily slammed the ledger open in front of the laptop's webcam, positioning it so the pages were clearly visible. The handwriting, the numbers, the names. "My name is Emily Turner," she said, her voice steady despite the cold, despite the pain radiating from her jaw where David had hit her. "This is the truth about Councilman Marcus Reed. This is a financial ledger documenting the systematic laundering of municipal education funds through the Chicago Public Library's Preservation Department. The amounts, the dates, the authorization codes, they're all here." The viewer count exploded. 1,000, 5,000, 10,000. On the loading dock outside, the sound of a blowtorch began. Metal sparked. The vault door, designed to protect, began to compromise. Emily kept turning pages. She kept reading. The vault door fell inward with a crash that seemed to shatter the entire building. Dust erupted in a cloud. Sarah Crane stepped through, her face twisted in a mask of rage. She wore a tailored suit and carried herself with the authority of someone who'd never expected to be caught. She saw the laptop. She saw the phone in Emily's hand, held high. "Say hello to 50,000 people," Emily said. Sarah's hand reached for her holster, then stopped. She stared at the laptop screen, at the image of herself standing in the vault, covered in dust, her face frozen in fury. 50,000 people watching live. The stream spreading, going viral. Impossible to contain. The police burst in behind her. Federal agents, city investigators. The cavalry arrived too late. The damage was already done. The truth was already out. As Sarah was led away, as David was loaded onto a stretcher, Emily held the ledger up to the camera one final time. The back cover. A photograph taped to the inside. Sarah, Reed, and a third man the camera caught in profile, Governor Mitchell Walsh. 3 people standing in what appeared to be the library's director's office, holding what looked like a wire transfer document, smiling. The corruption went higher than anyone knew. The stone steps of the library stretched down into the dawn. The sun was rising over Chicago, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. Emily descended the steps slowly. She was wrapped in a shock blanket, her clothes torn and stained. In her hand was a new library card, freshly issued, her name printed cleanly, her photograph on the laminate. She reached her pocket and slipped the card inside. Behind her, the library doors remained closed. Before her, the city was beginning to wake. Protesters were already gathering at the intersection, carrying signs. News vans were setting up equipment. The story would dominate every news cycle for weeks. Emily walked to her Volvo. The passenger side was dented from the parking garage impact. The door made a grinding sound when she opened it. She slid into the seat and closed her eyes. The car smelled like fear sweat and rain. She turned the key. The engine, impossibly, caught on the first try.